Thank you for all coming out today. I'm holding the mic, but you won't hear noise from the mic, because that's for a live broadcast or a tape broadcast on MCTV. Okay, so I'm Jim Gish. I'm one of the folks who is serving on the Ilsley 100 project team. What a journey we've been on the last, really the last year, I suppose, for this team, and years before that, envisioning the future of our wonderful Ilsley Library, which I think you all know is going to celebrate its 100th birthday in 1924 is when it was born. So the building needs some work. That prompted a lot of activity on our part to figure out not just how to fix what's broken, but how to envision a library that will serve our community really well over the next 100 years. So tonight, the main order of business tonight is to present to you and get your feedback on 4 building options that we've identified as 4 options for going forward with the library. You may have seen some of this information you may have seen already. John Flowers wrote a very good comprehensive article in the Aspen Independent last week that covered a lot of the ground we're going to cover tonight. The select board's been presented with this information as well as you've seen the transcript of that. But we're going to walk you through tonight where we've been and where we think the community might want to go. And so we'll start with a quick recap.
Jim, could you turn on your mic? That would help.
Hold it closer to your mouth, please. It doesn't. Point it at your mouth.
Like that.
Rock star.
It's not for the
Big
room.
rock
No, it's not on in the room.
Right.
It's only on for MCTV.
Oh.
So if you have trouble hearing me, just say, talk louder and I'll.
Whoa.
There.
Talk it louder.
Yeah, I'll talk louder. I would prefer to talk louder, it's just kind of weird holding this thing in front of my. Okay, so here's what we're going to do tonight.
Better.
Better? Okay. Had to turn it up. So we're going to do a quick recap. Dana's going to walk us through what's going on with this building and what is the professional library staff recommending for our library of the future. Then we're going to take a deep dive into the 4 building options. I'll give you a brief preview of those in just a sec. We're going to ask you what you think. That's why you're here tonight, and that's why we are here tonight. And then we'll talk about next steps on this journey and what's coming up next. So here are the 4 options. We're going to go into far more detail on these a little later in the presentation today, but let's go over them right now. Okay, so option A says renovate current building. This is a kind of fix what's broken approach to things. We need a new boiler system, we need a new elevator, we need new carpeting, we need new paint. Hey folks, this is a building that's 100 years old and has had not a lot of attention given to its improvement over the years. So this is kind of a treading water approach. If we just kind of address the things that really need to be fixed right now, this is option A. I'm going to move over to option C here, which is renovate and add index. Sorry, it's a little far down there if you can't see it on the screen here. But our professional library staff, Dana and her team, have gone through a very long process of kind of identifying what's really needed in each of our sections of the library. The children's section, the adult section, the public meeting rooms, the restrooms that we have. Really taken a deep dive in the whole library. And they've identified about 6,000 additional square feet that are needed for the library. Just to give you a sense of that, what that means in terms of the current library, that's at 18,000 square feet right now, so we're looking at an additional 6,000 feet, so about a 1/3 increase there. And this would be, as Dana will explain, would among other things, kind of double the programming space for children's, tweens, and teens. It would add public meeting rooms, would modernize the restrooms, would do a lot of good things which we'll talk about. So, but the point is there, option A doesn't expand any space at all. It just kind of keeps the building as is, right? Option C looks down the street and says, well, people have been talking about Ben Franklin for a long, long time. How long has it been empty now? 5 years? Something like that. A long time, right? So should we look at an annex? Is there another property downtown that we should look at that would become an annex to the library? So So option C incorporates or looks more closely at that annex idea. Back up to the top, renovate and expand. That's this current building, but reimagined on the footprint it is currently on. And some those of you who remember the plan that was put forward to the town in 2017, kind of reimagined the space on its current footprint. The footprint being not just the footprint of the physical library that we were looking at, but kind of the larger footprint of the space that it's on, including the area out back here that's also owned by the town. Okay, so we're really going to get into that option B here as we move forward. The final one, option D, is build new. Okay, it's just find another use for Ilsley Library and start all over. And the start all over option is really focused in the lower municipal parking lot. This is town-owned land. And that option, as we'll explain, involves not just building a library, but looking for a developer who could work with the library to create a kind of a multi-use building down there that might incorporate a parking garage, that might include other facilities as well, other aspects besides just a library. So that's kind of, that's that option. So those are our options A, B, C, and D, conveniently lettered. And we're going to go into far more detail on that as the evening gets underway. Okay, so just a quick timeline here. Built in 1924. It's interesting that it was 50 years before any kind of further work took place on the Ilsley Library, and that was the creation of where the elevator shaft is, kind of the area next to the new town office there. Then in 1988, was just 11 years later, was the bigger addition that's kind of on the marquee side here, where the Christmas tree sits during the holiday season. Back in 2007, the library trustees started looking at, we need more space, how are we going to manage that? And as these things are, it took some time for things to move forward. 2013, 2014 led to a plan that was put forward in 2017. That was kind of a whole design of a revised library on this space. And that arrived right about the same time that Merchants Row and Main Street bridges were declared unsafe. Some of you might remember that little project. And I do. The town had other priorities, and there was a lot of other complications at that time, so it was set aside. So here we are back now. As I said, we've been up and running for about a year at the Select Board's request to put together, to study this, the future of the library, and to make some recommendations. So again, that brings us back to why we're here tonight. I won't mention what happened in 2020. We've heard enough about that. Here's the gang that I think many of you are familiar with. Joe and Amy from the Board of Trustees. Amy's over here, Amy Incher, and Joe McVeigh is over there. Dan Brown and Farhad Khan from the Select Board. Dan's over here in the corner. Farhad will not be able to join us tonight. Ken Perrine, former president of the National Bank of Middlebury. Barbara Doyle Wilch, a very accomplished library professional. There's me. Ruth Hardy, our state senator. Judith Harris, who is the liaison from the town, has been great for kind of bringing in the construction point of view. And Dana Hart, our library director, up here in the front row. Okay, so that's your 18, and I'm going to now hand it over to Dana to talk to us about some of the deficiencies in the building and some of her vision for moving forward. Dana.
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So as Jim alluded to, there's really two things that are driving the need for this facilities project. The first is that library services have really outgrown the current building. In order to continue to meet the community's needs, we need more space and more flexible space. That started back in 2007. And the other is that this current building has a fair few deficiencies, some of which are pretty pressing. Is that better? Okay. So I'm not going to dwell on all of the current facility issues. I think many of you are familiar, but I'm just going to highlight a few of the ones that are kind of giving a sense of urgency to this project. And the first, of course, is our heating system. Our boiler is almost 30 years old now. It's incredibly unreliable. It just simply needs to be replaced. That has to happen. The same is true for our elevator. It's approaching the end of its life. Any number of entrapments is too many entrapments, and we do have a few every year. So that needs to be addressed. The basement level has leaks, so the children's room and this space occasionally have groundwater coming up. That leads to mold, all sorts of complications, as you can imagine. We do not have an HVAC system, so that means if we can't open a window, which we can't do in the winter, there's no fresh air circulating in the library. And we really came to appreciate what a concern that is from a health perspective during the pandemic. I think we all gained a new appreciation for the importance of fresh air. We simply don't have enough space. There are serious safety and accessibility issues throughout the building. Our entrances, especially around our bathrooms, there's a lack of sight lines throughout the building. And we have another safety issue with our third floor, which houses Middlebury Community Television. There's no secondary egress to the third floor. So these are all issues that need to be dealt with just for us to continue occupying this building and sort of continue to have a functioning library. But of course, we want a library building that does more than just meet that bare minimum threshold for occupancy and functionality. So to guide this project, the Ilsley Public Library trustees came up with a vision statement. So Ilsley Public Library will be a welcoming, accessible, and safe community hub with the flexibility and sustainability to enrich community members' lives now and into the future. That's what we're shooting for. So the first thing that the Ilsley 100 team really worked on was working with library staff and a professional consultant to sort of answer the question, how do we translate that vision into a building? What spaces does the community want to see in a library building? And that work drew really heavily on several years worth of feedback that we gathered from the community, focus groups, community conversations, surveys, things like that. And this slide just highlights some of what we learned from that community feedback, sort of reflecting what the community wants to see in a library. So the preliminary plan that the Ilsley 100 project team put together reflects that community feedback, as well as best practices in library design. And it calls for adding several new spaces. We'd like to add a conference room and a community living room so that we can have more community gatherings, more meetings, more programs. We'd like to have a library activity room. This would allow us to do even more library programming, especially programming that can be kind of messy or require cleanup. So anything with crafts or cooking, lots of children's programs require cleanup. We'd love to have a dedicated space for teens. We don't have that currently. We desperately need it in Middlebury. And of course, we want adequate public facilities here in the building. We'd also like to expand several existing spaces. So the plan calls for doubling our youth services, especially pre-K and kindergarten. That would be significantly expanded. We'd be able to expand and separate our elementary and middle school areas. This is important because those are really developmentally distinct age groups, so we need to program those spaces differently. We would expand and enhance our community meeting room. One of the things we could address are the speakers, if you're having a hard time hearing. And we'd love to have adequate staff and storage spaces. On your way in, you might have seen we have books piled up in the vestibule here. We're just really bursting at the gills. And I'll just point out that the images included in these slides are meant to be aspirational and inspirational, and they're not necessarily what we're envisioning for our own building. So the project team presented this vision in much more detail at a series of public meetings in November, and there's a recording of that on our website if you couldn't make it. And then we asked for feedback from the community. A lot of you that I see tonight came to that meeting, one of those meetings, so thank you. We received a lot of input from the community. It was largely positive and sort of affirmed that yes, this vision is on the right track by and large, which is great. And we also were given some new and exciting ideas which we can incorporate as we move forward in the process and start working with the design team down the road. So to achieve all of this, to get all those new spaces and expand the spaces and do everything that the community would like to see, We need to add 6,000 square feet, which would bring us up to a total of 24,000 square feet. So the second thing the project team has really worked on over this past year is identifying and exploring 4 different options, each of which would fulfill this vision to various degrees. So not every option gets us all of those spaces and all of that expansion, and that's what we're really here to talk about tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe McVeigh, and he's going to walk you through the options and pros and cons and cost estimates in more detail.
Thank you, Dana. So we've got these 4 options, and what we want to do this evening is to kind of walk you through them, tell you a little bit more about them, some pros and cons that the project team has identified. And when we started this process, we knew that we wanted to think broadly, we wanted to think about a lot of possibilities, but you'll notice, especially if you look at the screen here, that, and by the way, a note about the community meeting room. One of the challenges of the community meeting room is if you're sitting in the back row, you can't see the bottom of the screen there, can you, right? But you'll notice that these are not very lifelike or realistic depictions of what a new library might look like. And that's deliberate, because we know that once we start looking at brick and mortar and very specific designs, people start having very strong feelings about that. And we're not there yet. We're just at the point now where our goal is to figure out which of these directions we want to be going in. So in addition to studying up on libraries, in addition to the planning that Dana talked about, we thought, gee, I wonder how much it would cost to do each one of those, because we find that whatever our aspirations might be, at some point it's got to be paid for. And strangely, there are some people in town who do not seem to think that they would like their taxes to be raised. And so here's what we did. We went out and hired the best construction estimator in Vermont, Henry Erickson of Erickson Consulting. And we asked Henry if he would look at these options, and we gave him as much detail as we possibly could. We gave him this many square feet, this is renovation, this is building new. We gave him as much detail as we possibly could, and we said, how much would this cost? And Henry came back to us with something called an order of magnitude estimate. Now, what does that mean? Basically, an order of magnitude estimate means we want to get a sense of how much this costs versus how much that costs, okay? And Henry did an incredible job, and for those of you who are interested, maybe Dan could grab that purple notebook on the table there. We have his 80 pages of reporting, and if you want to pass that around for anybody who's interested in figures, that's not going to be everybody. In incredible detail. It gave us some terrific order of magnitude estimates. But anytime, I'm going to show you some numbers in a little bit, and I want you to take those numbers with a grain of salt, because we do not know what a library would cost until we have a design, at least schematic design. So these are kind of ballpark figures. So what we asked Henry to do was to look primarily at the base construction costs. How much would the materials cost? How much would the labor cost? And that kind of gives us a base figure. And then from there, you add in some things that you have to do for any construction project. You have to have the fees and general conditions for the prime contractor, some insurance for them. Contingency, what if we run into something that's unexpected? We need to build that into the budget. What about inflation? That's called escalation. We built that into the budget as well over a one-year period. And then that gives us a second sort of a subtotal, and to that, we add about 10% for owner's costs, which are things that would be our responsibility, and about 10%, which is an estimate for design fees, say for an architect. So we are incredibly lucky to have Henry Erickson here tonight in person, and I'm going to invite Henry just to stand up for a minute and try to give you a little bit of a sense of what this involved. And Later in the evening, you'll have an opportunity to ask us specific questions about methodology and so on, if you like.
Yeah, so as we just talked about, the whole practice to do this was to do the budgets and to do them with the same kind of methodology so that we could compare apples to apples. There wasn't drawings, there wasn't, just some sketches and some things to work from. And by doing the estimates the way I constructed them, it was easy to compare costs and have a relative difference so you could actually see what each option costs and what makes the most sense in terms of budget. And I think that's it for now. I'm sure there'll be questions later, and I will be happy to answer in detail. Thanks.
Thank you, Henry, who drove over the mountains from Warren or Wakefield to be with us tonight. So we hope that you have some good questions for him later on. So let's take a little closer look at these particular options. And I'm going to start things off, and if you read the article in the newspaper, you're aware of this. The project team started off with these 4 different options, and we've actually ruled a couple of them out. We've said this is just not going to serve our purposes, but we want to present them to you just the same so that you can see what we're thinking and why we did that. So the first option is to renovate the current building. What would this involve? It's the existing structure, right? We're not talking about adding anything. We need to bring the building up to code, the elevator, the electrical, and so on. Upgrade the ventilation system. There'd be some rearrangement of offices and study spaces. Be new paint, new flooring, new doors. And we also are aware that, especially in this age of the pandemic, it's really great to be able to go outdoors and have some programming. Now, if you go sometime outside the back here, you go over towards the Marquee Theater, you'll notice there's a little bit of grass space back there, quite a little bit. And so we envision putting a kind of a pavilion out there, sort of a building, with a roof on it that could serve the needs of outdoor programming. So you will ask yourself, how much would it cost to sort of fix what's broken here? And the answer is about $5.5 million, just to kind of fix what we have here. Well, what are the advantages of this approach? It preserves the building, and it addresses the deferred maintenance. It's fairly straightforward, it's fairly simple, and it maintains space for a future addition. If we wanted to, we could keep building. There are some negatives. There's not really enough space for the functioning of our current programs or future programs. Doesn't really solve all of our safety and especially accessibility issues. That's a big issue for us, is trying to get people into the library with the very steep stairs out in front, the awkward entrance there, the interesting ramp back here. So it limits our flexibility, and it would require us to relocate during construction, which we would rather not do. So ultimately, I think our decision was, we could do this. We could just kind of fix what's broken, but we're going to have to come back in 10 years and build new. It doesn't really fulfill the vision that we have for the future. So we crossed option A off the list. So let's take a look at option C. Option C is renovate and add an annex. So by renovate, that's exactly option A, right? In other words, fix everything that's wrong in the current building, but then add some space. And as Jim said earlier, lots of people have said, look, you need more space? Hey, there's more space down the street. Why don't you take a look at that? And people kept coming to us and suggesting the Ben Franklin building. And so we took the Ben Franklin building as a basis to cost out what it would cost to add an annex. And so Henry kind of took that building. It would have to be almost completely gutted and rebuilt from the inside. So we start off with the existing
building, we'd have to buy that building and then fix it. And Amy Mincher, one of our library trustees and a member of the Ilsley 100 project team, is going to share with you some of the pros and cons about this approach.
I can do it. All right, so, let's see. Oh,
Oh,
we
sorry.
get to talk about the cost too.
My fault. Yeah, so what would it cost us to do this? It would cost about $6.3 million to renovate the Ben Franklin building. It'd have to be gutted completely. One of the interesting facts about building libraries is it costs more than building most other buildings. Why? Books are very heavy, and you have to make sure that any part of the library can hold the building collection. So it cost about $6.3 million to renovate Ben Franklin. We have to add to that the $5.5 million that we just talked about to renovate this building, but then we have to buy the building, right, and get rid of some asbestos in it. So that's about very close to $1 million. That brings us up to $12.7 million for the idea of renovating this building and adding an annex down the street.
Right, thanks, Joe. So some of the pros of this is that we could keep that we'd add a lot of space, but still be able to keep this building, which we love. It's actually more space than we need if we added on if we took over the Ben Franklin building. We could create lots of spaces in it that would work for us. It's kind of like, would be like an empty shell. And let's see, what else? The library might be able to operate on one building. Yeah, well, we don't really know how that would work. If maybe we wouldn't have to spend so much time in a temporary location if we were just renovating that space, and then we'd have to renovate this space. So it would not be super easy. Cons, now we have a 1924 building to maintain and a 1909 building to maintain. So adding on another historic structure to care for is a lot. The other thing about the Ben Franklin building in particular is that it has 2 apartments in it. So the town would have to become a landlord, which I don't know if we're really prepared to do that. Also, it's kind of like, we don't really know I don't know, some people have said that they've seen it and they know what's in that building, but we don't really know. So that's a question mark. And so that's when we talk about abatement. We don't know what kind of hazardous materials could be in the building or what we would find once we got in there. We're a little bit concerned about the accessibility issue in that space because, well, it has the back entrance, which would be great. So the whole kind of like back parking lot would become the real library entrances. But we'd have to worry about staffing those areas too. And that would add a significant cost, a long-term significant cost to have to add more staff to cover those 2 spaces. We'd still have to go to a different location during the building process, maybe not for as long as for some of the other options. The town loses the revenue of having a store or a commercial property at that Ben Franklin site. And then the big, huge issue is that we would have to separate children from adults. And families come to the library together. They want to hang out in the library together. They want to know that their family is in the same building as them. And so to have either adults in this space and children in the other space, or adults in the other space and children in this space, that it would be really problematic. It's a major concern for us. So I think that's it. I think those are our pros and cons.
Thank you, Amy. And how much would that cost us? Yeah, $12.8 million. So this is another option that the Ilsley 100 project team said, you know what? No. So we've taken that off the table, which brings us to the 2 ideas that are still on the table. The first of which is to renovate and expand. So in other words, we would be renovating and repairing the original 1924 building. We would be expanding with new construction to add square feet. Now, something that we have not decided is, would we, in that process, demolish the newer additions? So just to refresh your memory, the 1977 addition is the one closest to the town offices. It's basically a stairway and an elevator that was put in 1977. Why? To improve accessibility to the building. That was the whole purpose of that addition. Then in 1988, the larger addition was built closer to the Marquis Theater. You are sitting in that addition right now. So the 1924 building is the original building. Now, for cost estimating purposes, we had to make a decision as to how to advise Henry. And so we looked at the work that had been, the very excellent work that had been done by the previous library building committee, who worked very diligently from 2014 to 2017. And their recommendation was to tear those down and to start over. So we said to Henry, when you're looking at the costs, imagine that we're tearing those down and we're starting, and we're going to build new here. So that would kind of bring the boundaries back to the original 1924 building. So if you're standing on Main Street, that's the part behind this, the tall stairs. So that would keep us more or less in the current location. It would maintain our Main Street frontage. And to do that, including demolishing and then kind of rebuilding, though probably not in the same way, that would cost us $14.8 million. So I'm going to invite Mr. Jim Gish to come up and to share with you some of the pros and cons of that option.
Thank you, Joe. So let's talk about the pros first. You know, there's growing kind of enthusiasm for this option among the committee, and I want to share some of the reasons why we're thinking good things about this option. I don't know how you feel about the main lobby, but ever since I arrived in Middlebury, that main lobby upstairs to me is the library. You know, that says library to me. Maybe it's my generation, whatever, but I love that wood paneled, it's an oak paneled main lobby up there. So that's a pro for me because that stays in place, okay? But we're going to kind of build around that and take this 1924 foundation and improve it. So big plus here is that the 6,000 square feet that we talked about, there'll be room for that on this kind of reimagined footprint here. This next benefit, it says the community would benefit from new and expanded spaces, including for youth services and provided community access meeting spaces. So it makes room for all of the kind of the new envisioned spaces that Dana was talking about earlier. You might not be able to read this at the back there, but the last bullet under here says provides adequate space for MCTV, which is really important. What a great community asset MCTV is, and for the Friends of the Library, which is absolutely critical to the functioning of the library as well. So those are some of the pros. Spaces, we'd have a chance to kind of start over, right? So you can from the beginning design spaces that are flexible, that are accessible, that you know, kind of meet what Dana was talking about earlier about having a welcoming, accessible, safe library for our community. One of the few places where young and old kind of come together in Middlebury. I think that's really important. Relatively straightforward path to completion with few complexities. Well, I doubt that's true. Let's say it's a pro. You know, Heidi. Let's move on. Okay. The cons. So the way we're envisioning it, we talked again about, you know, there's a space behind American Express Travel and the nail salon here that's right out back here, right, which you may be familiar with. So that we'd probably expand to that. The point here is that a con would be that once this kind of rebuild goes in place, there's no more room to expand. That's it. Okay. So that might be okay. We might be okay for the next 100 years. Requires relocation during construction. We've talked about that. You're going to rehab and renovate this entire building while the operations have got to move somewhere else. So we got to figure that one out. That's a pretty big lift, but it's just one of the things we'll have to take into account. Reduces available space for outdoor program. This was interesting to me because I didn't think of our little garden area out here as kind of, you know, an important part of the library. What I've learned in the past year is it is. And, you know, particularly, I think this maybe COVID kind of brought it into focus as, you know, the importance of outdoor programming. But even beyond that, people really love that outdoor space. And so it could reduce the amount of space we might have potentially for outdoor programming. And that brings us back to option D, and Joel, hand it back over to you.
So thank you, Jim. Option D is to build new. And why would we want to do that? Well, anybody here live in an old house? There's a lot to deal with in an old house, right? Well, this library building, the 1924 building, it's an old building. The ceilings are low. Many of the walls are made of stone. There's not a lot of flexibility. The wiring is old. The plumbing is old. Hey, might it not be easier to just leave this building behind and build a new building? Now, this has been done successfully in a number of Vermont communities, and if you have the opportunity, I would encourage you to visit the new library in Shelburne. It's on Route 7, just up the road there. Our former librarian, Kevin Unrath, is the librarian there. If you go to South Burlington on Dorset Street near the Blue Wall, it's a large complex in there which has a new library connected with their town offices and an elder care center. It's a magnificent. And if you go down to Manchester, they abandoned their old library and moved to quite a different location very, very successfully. So what might this look like? It would be new construction on an alternate site. And again, to give Henry something to work with, we took as an example the lower parking lot here, which is sometimes referred to as the EDI site, for the Economic Development Initiative site. And we use that as an example. There would be a possibility of collaborating with a developer to do this. Now, one of the challenges here is that if we were to build in that lower parking lot, it would take away some parking. Parking is sacrosanct in the town of Middlebury. So were we to take away some parking, we would need to add some parking. And so we looked at a proposed project from a few years ago called the Next Bridge Project, which had imagined a couple of decks of parking, like a parking garage. So we built that into the estimate. Now the thing is, were we to build new, what would we do with this existing building? We would need to find some kind of adaptive reuse. There could be some very excellent ways in which this building could be used, but we would have to figure that out. Now, possibly, that could produce revenue for the new building, right? On the other hand, it could take a long time to find just the right partner to do that. So Dan Brown, who's a member of our select board, is going to share with you some of the pros and cons of this possibility. Oh, no, not actually, hang on. While Dan is here, let me tell you how much this will cost, okay?
Better you tell it than me.
Now, bear in mind that when we did this, we were looking at this place down here, we were imagining like 2 floors of library being built on top of a parking garage. So remember how much option B, renovate and expand, would cost?
12.7.
Yeah, but I think we said 14.8, yeah. So believe it or not, building a new library would not cost all that much more if we're just looking at the library part of it. It would cost about $15.5 million, but then it's the parking garage that is really expensive. And what did we say, Henry, $67,000 per space?
Yeah, something like that.
About $67,000 or $68,000 per parking space. We were counting 96 parking spaces, I believe. Now,
I was just gonna say, that's a lot of quarters and meters.
It could be.
Yeah.
So, and the one thing I want to mention here is that, you know, we started off looking at the EDI site, and then we've had many suggestions that perhaps we should be looking at other locations. Maybe we could build a library on Route 7 South, for example. Now, the only thing is that, and Henry can correct me here, but this estimate of 50.5 million assumed that the library was being built on top of a parking garage. Therefore, there was no need for a foundation because the parking garage was the foundation. Okay, so if we were to build new on some unknown property, that would add the cost of the foundation, and presumably the cost of the property acquisition and perhaps some other costs. And what did we say? Maybe
16.5 to 17.5.
so probably $16.5 to $17.5 million. And now Dan Brown will share with you some of the pros and cons.
I think all the pros and cons were embedded in exactly what Joe had just said. But we had a great deal of interest on the select board of resurrecting the EDI site. As you remember, several years ago, we had a proposal. We had a builder, and it was after a competition and everything. But again, the same things that delayed the library also made that kind of go away, and there's some economic conditions that it went away. And one of our goals was to resurrect that. So when the idea of the library, of doing a new library, it became exciting to us that there's a possibility that maybe the EDI site could be kicked off with the start of the library, and possibly with a partnership with some other builders to help us reduce the costs of the building. Also, we think that we've had a lot of discussions about how important it is possibly to keep the library in the downtown area. When Jim said about the complexities, a lot of those complexities of tying into an old building and adding on to it, the complexities of building a new building would be significantly less, with the exception of finding the piece of property and the infrastructure of the community and the infrastructure that would have to be added to that. But the biggest thing that a new building would give us a building that would be perfectly suited for everything we wanted to do and achieve all of our goals. It was also probably incorporate a lot of flexibility, that we could build a building that it could change a lot inside with doing very little or spending very little money. And it also would be a building that could probably be designed that if we needed more space in the future, we could easily expand on it. I'm not sure if and one of the important things is this library could continue to operate while the other library was being built, which would save a significant amount of money. Again, we'd probably have more space for outdoor programming because we'd have more land. And also in the EDI site, we've talked about where we would put that building, and the placement of it. It would not necessarily have to be, like Joe said, on a parking garage up here. It could be moved further back in the plot of land back there. The difficulty is giving up this historic building, and not only giving up this significantly old building, but also having to do something to repurpose that. And we obviously don't want to lose this building. We can't do that on our own to add the cost to the town to renovate this building. We would have to get, in that case, a developer too, and to help us or help envision and help pay for it. And I've talked about this already. The EDI site is our idea was to have that based on helping us pay for it by partnering with maybe a developer to develop more businesses, or more housing, which is desperately needed, and one of the goals of the select board. And that would be difficult to do on a short notice. So the biggest complexity of building new on the EDI site would be the delay that would probably occur. With what I just said, we need to develop or design the entire site. We just can't plop a building down there. We want to look for assistance with partnering. And that's going to add a lot of time. And I don't think we have time to add to this project with the condition this building is in. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Dan. So, we've been doing a lot of talking, and we would like to hear from you, and we're gonna do this in a couple of phases. I'm sure that you have specific questions about some of these specific options, but before we get to that, we'd just like to know, does anybody have general questions about the process that we went through, or the cost estimating, or how we went about evaluating things? Just sort of big picture questions as opposed to, well, what if we did this and did that? So, yeah, Heather.
In the prices, does the cost to relocate the library figure into those?
No, that was not taken into account.
Okay.
But Dana, I think, has done a little research into what it might cost.
So we started, so moving costs and temporary relocation costs are not included in this. And that's because we've started to look into that, and we have a very wide range of what those costs might be, because it all depends on what's available at the time that we need a temporary location. Are we gonna be able to find a temporary location big enough, or are we gonna have to get 2 separate locations? If we have 2 separate locations, is one of them a library building for services and programs, and one of them is a storage space for the majority of the collection? And all of those different options have very different price points. So we're working to kind of come up with a range of how much that might cost, but it just seems so disparate, what those figures could be. Also, the duration of time. How long are we gonna be there? We could be there for a year and a half, or significantly longer. So we did not include those in the estimate.
Some of those costs might be included in the owner's costs, very possibly. But this, you see, would be one of the advantages of building new, if we were able to keep operating here and then move once. If we were gonna renovate and expand here, we'd need to find a new space, move to it, and then move back. So that would cost a little bit more. Just a second, I think there was a question in the back. No?
The uncertainty factor, I find very disturbing, the uncertainty of finding a co-partner for any of these projects, particularly the new development. What's here in Middlebury to attract some new developer to take on such an ambitious project?
So the point was, as regards option D, it might be challenging to find a developer. Any other kind of questions about our process or big picture?
I'm not sure it's a process question, but my question would be, what makes you think that we can get more businesses in here? We can't even fill the buildings we have now for new businesses.
So this would probably be related to option D, the challenge of finding new businesses to fill that building.
And how do you address those?
From a town point of view, those are very difficult, and that's why it's a con. That's why it would take a great deal of time to do this. We'd have to go through an extensive process through the select board of trying to do a partnership like we did before, which was a couple of years. So it would add significant amount of time. We probably can do that. We think we can attract developers in here to develop this property. We're not sure if we can bring developers in here to partner in developing a library along with everything else they're doing. So that's a huge detractor from that option.
Yep. So, yep.
The last process did evaluate putting an addition on. What's different about this one from the previous? you kind of reject their design, or?
So what's different is we don't have a design yet for that option B. Were we to recommend to the select board that we pursue option B and renovate and expand this building, we would, I don't wanna say be starting from scratch, cause so much good work has been done, but we would be working with, a potentially new design team, to answer questions like, do we wanna still take down those additions, the 77, 88 addition, or can we retain them? Is there a possibility of expanding in a way that allows the municipal building and the library to interact more fruitfully, to talk to each other better? Is there a way we can expand towards the Marquee Cinema or towards Main Street? So we would be asking those questions, we'd be looking at those questions fresh with a new design team and figuring that out down the road. So this isn't a rejection of the GBA plan, which honestly added 6,000 square feet and would have solved a lot of these problems. But we wouldn't be moving forward with that specific plan. Does that answer the question?
So I'm starting to hear a lot of kind of more specific questions here. And so if it's okay, what I'd like to do is to move us into kind of the next section of feedback from you. And I've got a couple of questions for you. The first one is, as you think about those options that we've elected to move ahead with, which are option B and option D, are there any pros and cons that you can think of that maybe we didn't think of, okay? And then secondly, what excites you? What do you think is a good idea? What concerns or what questions do you have? And I'm gonna ask you to take just a couple minutes to turn to a person sitting next to you or near you. Also, if anybody is interested in those more detailed financial figures here, we do have this notebook full of them if anybody wants to take a look. All right. So what are your ideas that you have about pros and cons we might not have thought of, or concerns, questions?
One of the concerns I have, and you may have covered it, but I didn't hear it, is there is plenty of planning for children, but this community has many more elderly in it than it does children. And we need you, I'm one of them. And I would love a space for movies and for book clubs to meet. Just for and I can think of more, not for bingo, you understand, but just really library-oriented activities, speakers or the rest. And I didn't hear much attention given to that.
Thank you for that. Dana is taking some notes on that, and we'll be visiting one of our local retirement communities tomorrow to speak specifically to some folks in that
I hope it's Eastview.
demographic. It is.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Other ideas, thoughts, questions, concerns?
So one big concern I have for option D is there's no price, and you didn't consider the renovation of the existing building in that pricing. And I really think that it should be included. I really think that should be part of the pricing for that option, so.
Here, here.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, proposal D makes the library a lot less prominent than it is now. It puts it out of sight down by the river, and it buries it in another building. There's no certainty that with the new parking structure would provide as many parking spaces as it will consume, plus those that are required by the new building. Furthermore, I don't think people really want to use a structured parking lot. I don't think people want to drive into it because it takes more time and because it's dangerous often. The idea of building down there anew and then converting this building into something useful is just competing with one another. You think you're going to build residences down there and more residences here, offices down there and offices here? I think they're just competing with one another. Temporarily, yeah, you might be able to use this space, but you'll have less parking, because that space is gonna be taken off. The lower parking lot will not be available. So where are people gonna park if they're gonna use the library, even if it isn't under construction? I assume, Henry, maybe you can confirm this, that there's no figure in the proposal D for the cost of this land owned by the town of Middlebury. That was a prerequisite or a requirement for the proposal that was made by Nextbridge. And then it was thought to be worth $1 million. So the town is essentially gonna subsidize somebody, whether it's the library or the developers, by not getting recompense.
So
for
was that a question of cost to the town because no one was paying for it?
Yeah,
I see.
yeah. Right. The town loses something that's of value, and it uses it by putting a library there and something commercial. The difficulty of repurposing this building is the same difficulty of fixing it up to meet the needs of the library. Has all the same problems. The heating and ventilating, where the elevator is and its need for a new one, the low ceilings which make it difficult to wire above and put plumbing and things into this building. The fact that the 88 edition has got trusses running across it. The next time you're there, look in between the stacks and you'll see that there are trusses which hold up this ceiling and the floors above it. And so it's very difficult to change the configuration of that space. That would also be true. I don't know how much use you'll get out of the basement in a repurposed building.
Don, how long is your list there?
Oh, not as long as you guys talk.
That's right.
I'll give you two more things.
Okay, thanks.
Okay?
I just want to make sure some other folks
I
have a
think
chance.
there's been no talk on the cons about the fondness for this building and the objections that will raise to the voters' positions. Remember how people felt about getting rid of the old municipal building, which was in far worse shape and far less loved. And finally, I don't know whether there is any financial ability. It's yet to be proven that any development in the lower parking lot is financially viable. It was not financially viable when it was proposed, when we put it out for proposals 4 years ago. And the one proposal which came through did not pay for the land, and I'll quote for you, depended on fees for all to park and municipal real estate tax relief and municipal low interest financing. So it's just so uncertain to do anything down there, whether it's the library or something else, that I think you should let somebody take the chances other than the town.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of option B. A lot of reasons. One of them is that this beautiful facade will stay, and just like Jim said, that welcoming lobby that we have. And I love the fact, I've seen it other places, and I'm sure an architect could take that and use the old and add a really dynamic space to it. So I'm a fan of that option. The two questions came to mind for me, and you can clarify. I'm having a hard time envisioning the footprint of a new addition attached to this building that still stays within the bounds of just the gardens and that little space over there. Will it extend into the parking lot at all, or is that where does that building go? And then the second question, Dana mentioned expanding in different directions, but to what degree can we expand up? Does that fit, go to a fourth floor in a new building to create more? That's another question.
That's an interesting design question. Could we expand upwards? And I think that also something to think about if we're that idea about being able to expand in the future, because it might be possible to build a 2 or 3 story addition that had the capability to be built on top of it. The question of the footprint is kind of a curious question because at present there is a certain amount of land which historically was deeded to the town specifically for the purpose of the library. Well, the library belongs to the town, right? So there is a boundary, and if you take a look at some of the charts from the 2017 proposal, it delineates exactly where that boundary is. It actually goes out a little bit into the existing parking lot, but not too far. 12 feet, John?
Yeah, but the proposal that was made in 2017, there was plenty of room out back there without going into the parking lot at all. It's not a little
Yeah.
space.
So,
It's a
but I
pretty
think
big space.
with the assumption that you take down the 1988 edition, that gives us quite a lot of room.
And you set it back enough from the road, Main Street, so that you have accessible entrance. You have a very gentle slope.
At grade entry from Main Street. Yeah.
Main Street.
Yeah.
People might forget, because you don't see it from Main Street, but there's a good chunk of land between the library and the Marquee Cinema.
Right.
And so that is available.
Yeah. Howard?
Yeah, and to address your second bullet, there are two factors that might impact the cost. One is, what's the time frame for each of those options? You know, if one's gonna take a lot longer, there's inflation, everything else that might factor in. The other one, which I know we've been talking to the library about, the Act 172, and so there's a very good possibility we could get a $500,000 grant from the state for option B, but we wouldn't be able to get option B. From a cost perspective.
Yeah. So there's some money out there. What's it for specifically, Howard?
It's from the ARPA funding, which for upgrading heating and ventilation.
Upgrading heating and ventilation.
Or energy efficiency in
Energy
general.
efficiencies,
Yeah.
but it only applies to existing
It has to be an existing
building, right? So that
And-
could apply to the 1924 building, but not to anything that was built.
And there was an audit that said that you could heat the library with heat pump only.
Yeah,
So,
great.
yeah.
Thank you. I think you had a question. Maybe, did you?
Oh, actually, I'm thinking it's maybe not, I was thinking backwards, but I lived in Lexington, Massachusetts when we did a new library on the existing site and moved operations into a municipal building down the street. And there was a problem with the storage of some of the materials, because even if you move to a new area, you're not using the whole collection. And so a lot of the boxes got wet and mice damaged. So that has to be done carefully. Maybe option B could keep most of the collection here while they're working on other places of it. I don't know.
Well, I'll just say that Dana has been researching this very carefully and has been in touch with some moving and storage companies that specialize in libraries. But realistically, in a renovation expansion, we would need to move to other space, and it's unlikely that we'd be able to bring the entire collection with us for ready access.
Right.
Some of it would have to go into storage. So,
Yeah, the last architects did think that we would not have to store everything, that the addition could be built in some gradual way, allowing things to continue in the 1924 edition. So it made it be a little less of a problem, but it's still a challenge.
yeah.
It seems to me that maybe without the architectural design, I don't know what your concept of into the future is. How big, how many more residents are gonna be here, how many more children you're gonna have, those kind of things. If you have a better picture of what your real need is, and then an architect could design it in a way of meeting rooms and TV and all this stuff, so you would know what you need, you might find that the architect that could design this older building, requiring still that it's gonna move, but I believe you can move easier than sometimes you think. And then you'd be able to renovate this building in a way that would be ready for the future. Now, I know you're gonna do all the wiring, plumbing, internet, and all that stuff is all gonna be redone. I just went through a big renovation myself, and it's costly. But on the other hand, somebody has said the aesthetic values of having a parking garage down here doesn't do much for me. And this old building is a wonderful old library.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering why the need for so many meeting rooms? Because there are other places in town where people could have meetings.
I'll speak for Dana here. At the moment, here I can't tell you why so many people want to come to the library. I guess people feel a sense of belonging. It's a public library. This is our big meeting space. So the challenge is that if somebody comes to us and they've got 6 or 8 people and they want to have a meeting,
This is all we got.
this is it, right?
Yeah.
And so if we have a meeting in here of 6 to 8 people, another group, which is even larger, can't be in here. Our planning team, the Project 100 team, has been regularly displacing large groups of school children who are here for story hour, who would normally be meeting in here, and instead they're kind of out there. So I think that the idea is different sizes and types of meeting areas.
Aren't
Why-
there 2 places on the main floor and 1 upstairs for smaller groups?
There are some spaces, I'll let Dana talk about it. She's more versed in this than I am.
Yeah, we have 3 small meeting spaces upstairs that can accommodate up to 4 people, and those book up. One of them is available for booking, and the other 2 are first come, first served basis. And so we do find that we have a need for more small meeting spaces, and we really have a need for, as Joe said, kind of like a mid-sized conference room meeting space. It doesn't happen constantly, but it happens with pretty frequently that we have multiple requests for more spaces than we have. And we've noticed an uptick that it's trending towards even more need as more people are working remotely and working from home and things like that. There are other spaces to meet in Middlebury, but they are either, I guess, more difficult to book or cost money, or people are not as comfortable there. So I can only say that we do have the need, and it's increasing.
Dana, does the library have access to the town meeting space when it's available?
Yes, I suppose is the quick answer
It's
to
pretty
that.
busy.
It's pretty busy. That's why I tried to book the municipal building meeting space for the Ilsley 100 project team, but we couldn't find a recurring time, so that's why we're in here and the kids are over there for their story time. But that space is also, it works for small conference groups, but it doesn't work for library programs and things like that.
I would like to see much more creative design about the option B. It doesn't have to be children over there and everybody else over here. Maybe option B, you tear down the Ben Franklin building, you build some of these extra conference rooms and meeting rooms, and maybe some special ones for seniors. You don't have to separate families. It seems that space is available. It'd be less expensive, although it's still, we don't know all of the costs associated with tearing down an old building and building new, but it's probably gonna be a lot less than option D.
Talking about option C is what you're talking about.
I don't recall.
So you were talking about the annex idea where we renovate
Yeah,
here and then
right, okay,
expand
right.
down there, so you
Yeah.
like that idea?
You know, all I heard was, we're gonna put the kids over there and the families everyplace else. I don't think that's a very creative design. I think you could get some more creative thought about how that annex could be designed. And, again, it's available, pretty much. We might have to, ask the, travel company to move across the street. I don't know what we do with Marquee Theater, but it still seems to me that there's much more, thought that should be put into that whole
So
annex
you're
idea.
talking about kind of the whole block here,
Yeah,
the
why
Marquee
not?
Theater.
Why not?
And along with what
Because
Jan
it'd be
said,
really
it would help
expensive,
to
yeah.
improve the downtown. Why not do that if we have a chance?
Get rid of the theater, tax base.
Get rid of the theater?
Don't get rid of it.
No, you can build around the theater.
Okay, well, let's stop talking
So, I will say that our project team has been tasked with dealing with the library, whereas the select board, of whom we have 3 members here tonight, or four members here tonight, is tasked with the larger issues of the town. And much as we would like to solve all of the issues of the town, we're trying to stay focused on our particular task and leaving that to them.
I think one big con for that, I know it's off the table and we probably shouldn't spend time talking about, but that option C, the annex, the big con for me is the additional staff and the additional long-term potential costs of having 2 separate buildings.
I don't see them necessarily having to be separate, and in terms of staffing, it's still gonna be less expensive than a whole brand-new construction someplace off-site.
Well, we told you that we'd keep you here until 8. You've been very patient. Those of us who are on the project team, we're happy to stay here all night talking with you about this. We feel pretty passionately about it. We've all taken to visiting libraries in different places on our vacations, okay? So we can't go anywhere now without looking at the library, but we're here, we're happy to talk with you. Henry is here, and Henry's happy to talk with you. Let me just quickly run through the next steps in the process here, okay? So the project team has been gathering input. Oh, you do this? No. The project team is going to be gathering input from you guys. We will choose one of these options to recommend, and then we'll recommend that to the select board. And the steps after that depend a little bit on which option is recommended and what the select board decides, right? Because in that, if it was simply dealing with this particular piece of property, that would be a little bit less complicated than dealing with some other issues down there. If we were to recommend option B and the select board would say, yeah, go for it, we could be working with a design team by sometime this summer. If it were option D, to go to the EDI site, that is a more complicated question.
And you're not considering option C anymore then?
We're not considering option C
So you're
anymore.
making decisions for us already?
Yes, we are. That is exactly what we were asked to do, and that's what we're doing.
I'd like to say that I think you guys have done a very good job.
I agree.
I think articulating these 4 options is very helpful and clarifies the issues. And I think you made wise choice in eliminating with the 2 that you did. I think option B seems to achieve everything that the library needs, or offset. Seems that it can achieve everything that the library needs, and create a building which will be flexible enough to accommodate future needs, which I don't think the existing building is.
No.
So I think you're doing a great job, and I hope you hang in there.
Thank you, John. Thanks. So just in case you didn't have a chance to share your particular idea this evening, you can write an idea down on a 3x5 card, drop it in an envelope that we'll put over by the door. You can also email your thoughts. Maybe you're going to go home and think of something that you wanted to say but you forgot. Write to Dana, our director. Her email is here. Now you want to keep in touch, of course, with what's going on with this project. So there, you'll want to go to the Ilsley Library website, where right at the top there's a beautiful banner that invites you to learn more about plans for the library's facilities and the Ilsley 100 project team. Jim Gish has been regularly sending out some blog postings, trying to keep folks informed. And if you want to really dig into things, if you go to the library website and you go to the About Us ribbon at the top, and you go down to the bottom, it says Ilsley 100 project team. It's got all the minutes of our meetings, all of the agendas. Most of the materials are reports to the select board and so on. We're very grateful for your interest and support, and if you want to stick around and talk or eat some more cookies, you're very welcome. So thank you all.